Welcome to Bible study, because you can tell that stuff's going on right now as we enter together. Somebody just came in late. Yeah, I just turned it on. And so the commotion is going on for a moment. We have to, I think, hurry up on our Bible study, because somebody wants to go home and watch a basketball game. And
I don't know if I want to or not right
okay. We don't have to worry about it. Maybe we'll go till 9 o'clock tonight
now.
then. We'll study just a little bit here, and it's good to see you guys tonight. It's been a warm day today, and hopefully we're going to at least stay in some milder temperature. I see Jill Bowman's on here. We don't need to talk to her right now. She's down there where it is warm, isn't she? So everybody says hi, Jill. Miss you guys. Let's have a word of prayer before we get started tonight. Be mindful of those that we've been thinking about, and continue just to remember them in this time. God, we give you thanks for our day and for this time together. We give you thanks for an opportunity to gather for study, and whether it's here in the church or whether it's through Facebook, and we'll enjoy. There'll be people that will enjoy it a little bit later on YouTube. But God, we're just thankful for the many blessings that you provided for us and for the words that you give to us. We just pray that you'll be with us as we study the words tonight in Scripture, and just be with those that can't be with us for some reason, and be with those that are not feeling very good in this day. For it's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. Let's see. So, well, last week we didn't meet here, but we did do a brief Bible study. If you joined us about 7:30, if you were able to. I've been trying to do that every so often, if I can, and maybe continue to do that, so that we sort of keep track of where we are in the book of Genesis. We're flying through pretty quick. It won't be long. Well, we've got about another, what is it? Chapter 50 is the last one, I think. So we've got another 20 chapters or so to work through, and we know who our big character really kind of is in Genesis, don't we, that we spend most of the time on. Will be Joseph, and then that'll introduce us into the period of Exodus as they enter into Egypt, or at least that family does. Now, we're mindful of the fact that our last week, if you did listen in, we were able to hear a little bit about Jacob. I think we'd already talked a little bit about Esau. Remember, Esau sold his birthright to Jacob for just a bowl of soup, wasn't it? He was hungry. And then his mother, Rebekah, who favored Jacob more than Esau. Esau was sort of the hunter, the son of the father, had gone out hunting, and during that time, Jacob tricked Jacob tricked Isaac so that he could get the birthright and the blessing. And the blessing was very important, but it was supposed to go to the older son, not the younger, and Jacob would have been that. So Esau comes back. He's very upset about everything, and Jacob's mother, Rebekah, tells him, you need to get out of here. And during that time, he goes to who? Do you remember? He went to Laban, didn't he? Remember, he moved to Laban, who was an uncle. And there he married which one of the daughters of Laban? They're kind of quiet here tonight.
He wanted to marry Rebekah, but he had to marry the other daughter first.
Ended up marrying two of them, didn't he? He really was attracted to Rachel, who was the youngest of the two. But when it came to the wedding night, in a sense, and that day the wedding was different. It wasn't this elaborate ceremony. It's just you waited in the tent, and the woman came in, and that's who you married. You were married by process of what men and women do. But when he woke up that next day, who was in there? It was the older sister, wasn't it? It was Leah. And remember, he had come to Laban, and when he said to Laban, I'll work for you how many years? It was 7 years, wasn't it? So he can marry Rachel, ends up marrying Leah. So he kind of confronts Laban and says, why'd you do this? He says, well, I'll tell you what I'll do is I want to marry Rachel, because he said, I can't marry off my youngest daughter before the oldest daughter. So he gets to marry Rachel, but he has to do what? Work 7 more years, doesn't he? And he fulfills this, and we'll see that in a little bit. He fulfills his obligation to him. It's funny that Jacob gets sort of deceived by Laban after what he had done, because wasn't he sort of deceptive too? A couple of times towards his brother in many ways. And so where we step into it tonight is beginning to get ready into chapter 30. Before that, I want to do chapter 29 verses, starting at verse 31. I'm not going to read some of that, because that kind of just gives us there till almost the end of chapter 30 verse 24, sort of lets us hear the birth of the children of Jacob. So let's go ahead and do that. There's going to be, do you remember how many children Jacob will have?
12.
It's 12, isn't it? And there's a certain number from each of the 2 wives, plus 2 of the wives' servants. And I have a list here, and we'll go through it in a minute, but let me read, and then we'll pick up there in just a moment. So in chapter 29, verse 21 or 31 starts, when the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he enabled her to have children, but Rachel could not conceive, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? She's unloved, because that's really not the one that Jacob wanted to marry, did he? It was through deception that he did. So what he did was, God says, I'm going to make her able to conceive children. Rachel will remain barren for a while, won't she? So Leah begins to have children. So Leah became pregnant, and her first son's name was Reuben. The Lord has noticed me, she said, and my husband will now love me. Her idea of being loved is have a number of children. And you'll see that, and that's what she's going to respond a number of times. The second one, verse 33, she soon became pregnant again and gave birth to another son. She named him Simeon. The Lord has heard that I was unloved and has given me another son, she says. Verse 34 is the same thing. And the child's name is Levi. Since this time, my husband will feel affection for me, since I have given him 3 sons. And then once again, she gets pregnant and has another son named Judah. Now I will praise the Lord. And then she stopped having children. So she felt unloved, and God kind of blessed her with the ability to have children. But her reaction is that's how she gains love through her husband, isn't it? I've got boys. Boys are coming through me, and he's having children. The other wife can't do it, can she? And so there's a little bit of jealousy between these 2 sisters in some way. When Rachel saw in chapter 30, when Rachel saw she wasn't having children, she became jealous of her sister. She pleaded with Jacob, give me children or I'll die. She needed to help out and that process of the lineage going forward. Because she knew, I would imagine, that she was the special of the 2 wives. That's the one he had chosen, because he was willing to work another 7 years just for her, right? Meaning that he worked really a total of 14 years to ensure that he could remain married to this one named Rachel. So what does Rachel do to sort of expedite this thing? Well, it reminds me a little bit of who? Sarah, doesn't it? What did Sarah do when she couldn't have children? Right. She kind of allowed Abraham to marry, and that's what we considered as Hagar, and they had a child. Well, here Rachel does sort of the same thing, doesn't she? She offers to Jacob her maid, which is named Bilhah, and he sleeps with her, and she can bear children, and then I can have a family through her. So Rachel gave her servant Bilhah to Jacob as his wife, and he slept with her, and she became pregnant and presented him with a son. Rachel named him Dan, for she said, God has vindicated me. He has heard my request and given me a son. Kinda, isn't it? Well, I guess since she's the maid, the servant, it's more of an ownership thing for her. And so the child, I guess, kind of just becomes hers in that way. Well, Bilhah not only has that one son named Dan, she has another one, it says, named Naphtali. And she says, I have struggled hard with my sister, and I'm winning. Well, guess what? You've only had 2 right now. She's got how many? 4 right now, doesn't she? So what does Leah do? Leah gets a little jealous again, so she offers to Jacob her servant girl, Zilpah. She has a child, names him Gad, has a second one, names him Asher. So in a way, Leah now has 6 children, doesn't she? This thing's populating out here. What a joy is mine, she says, for other women will celebrate with me. She is sort of at this place of going, I sort of am at a better power position than Rachel in some ways, aren't I? Because I'm having children and lots of them. One day it says during the harvest, Reuben found some mandrakes growing in a field and brought them to his mother Leah. And Rachel begged Leah, please give me some of your mandrakes. But Leah angrily replied, wasn't it enough that you stole my husband? Now you will steal my son's mandrakes too. Did she really steal her husband? Because who did he want to marry anyway? Rachel, wasn't it? And she got to marry Jacob through an act of deception in some way. So how does she deal with that? She's not stealing either one of them. Rachel answered, I will let Jacob sleep with you tonight if you'll give me some of the mandrakes. There's a lot of competition between these 2 sisters, isn't it? Numbers of children, who can sleep with Jacob. And, not to sound crass, but, Jacob's kind of probably enjoying a lot of this, isn't he? Rachel said, and then so that evening Jacob was coming from the fields. Leah went out to meet him, and she says, you must come and sleep with me tonight. That's just an odd sort of request or statement there, isn't it, to just say that. I have paid for you with some mandrakes that my son found. And I find that interesting when I read it, and it says that she paid to have him come. Well, you're his wife, So it shouldn't be that there's this bargaining going on between the 2. There needs to be some development of a relationship between these 2 again, doesn't it? Well, but nonetheless, it says that's what happened. So God blessed her, didn't he? Answered her prayers, and she became pregnant again with a 5th son for Jacob, named him Issachar. She said, God has rewarded me for my servant to be my husband as a wife. Then Leah became pregnant again and gave birth to a 6th son named Zebulun. She said, because God has given me a reward, now my husband will treat me with respect, for I've given him 6 sons. Then she gives birth to a daughter named Dinah. So there's this idea that because she's had more children, she should be more special now, shouldn't she? She feels like this is how she gains respect, gains love in the midst of this. It's an odd story or an odd relationship going on, isn't it, in what's happening? And a lot of it is just these 2 sisters just are really fighting over one man, aren't they? In the midst of it all. And then God remembered Rachel's plight and answered her prayers by enabling her to have a children. And she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. It says God has removed my disgrace, and she named him Joseph. For she said, may the Lord add yet another son to my family. So now we have, if I'm not mistaken, it's 11 sons right now. Because there'll be another one later, won't it? But, so the way we have it broken down is, we have Leah, who is Laban's oldest daughter, who has 6 sons and 1 daughter. So her children are going to be Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. Now, we don't count Dinah here because she won't count as one of the sons. Sorry, ladies. That's just the way it is. Bilhah was the slave girl to Rachel. She has 2 children, Dan and Naphtali. We then see Leah's servant girl, Zilpah, have 2 children, Gad and Asher. And then finally, Rachel has a child, and it's Joseph. So we have 11 right now, 11 sons in this family to Jacob. Now we know there's going to be a 12th come soon, but we're going to hear about that in just a little while. So here's these children, and it all came through this competitive nature between these two sisters, who one was able to conceive and one wasn't for some time, because one felt unloved and the other was a lot more respected and loved by her husband, which was the one that he wanted to marry in the first place, wasn't it? So we see these children being born to Jacob. And so now we're going to move a little bit away from that part of the story, because now we're going to see that Jacob is still living on the farm. He's been working for Laban for these 14 years. And in the midst of it, Jacob himself has caused Laban to become very wealthy, which maybe notes to us that he was a pretty good farmer, good at raising animals and livestock. And so he has really helped Laban become very wealthy in the midst of all of this. And because of that, that means that Jacob himself is wealthy too, isn't he? Because he will be part of the family. Now, it's going to note to us a little while that Laban has other sons, but Jacob is sort of the one mentioned because that's who is the son of Isaac, plus he marries the two daughters. So it says in verse 25, soon after Rachel had given birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, please release me so that I can go to my own country. Let me take my wives and children, for I have earned them by serving you. Let me be on my way. You certainly know how hard I have worked for you. So what he's doing is this, I guess it's 14 years have gone by now. And he says, it's time for me to be able to go on my own. Can you release me from these duties that you have given me? I have worked for 14 years for you. And that's what the obligation was, wasn't it? I said I would work 7 years to marry Rachel, but you gave me Leah. You also let me marry Rachel if I will work 7 more years, and I have done that. So there's a sense of honesty and integrity in Jacob, isn't he? So what happens here is he's saying, I want to go on my own now. I want to take the family with me, and we're going to start our own way. In verse 27, Laban replies, please listen to me. I have become wealthy, for the Lord has blessed me because of you. Tell me how much I owe you. Whatever it is, I'll pay it. Because he would... It's more than just the 2 wives, isn't it? I guess Laban feels that he needs to pay him for what has happened. That if it wasn't for Jacob, he wouldn't be in the spot he is now, is he? Would he? Undoubtedly, he has just truly caused this boom in what he has. And part of it could be that there's 11 boys that are around too to do some work, even though they're probably young here in this part. Jacob replied, you know how hard I've worked for you, and how your flocks and herds have grown under my care. You had little indeed before I came. That tells us a lot there, doesn't it? But your wealth has increased enormously. And the attribution is that God was with them, wasn't it? That it was because that Jacob came and had found favor in God that he also was able to instill some of that favor to Laban and help him to increase what he had. The Lord has blessed you through everything I've done, but what about me? When can I start providing for my family, my own family? A great question, isn't it? He's been working for his uncle, his father-in-law, this whole time. Now he kind of wants to be on his own, to take his family and see what he can do in the midst of that. What wages do you want? Laban again asked. Jacob replied, don't give me anything, just do this one thing. This is interesting how he does this. When I saw this again, I'll continue to tend and watch your flocks. So he's going to stay for a little bit longer, it looks like, so he can start working towards his investments. And let me inspect your flocks today and remove all the sheep and goats that are speckled or spotted, along with all the black sheep. Give these to me as my wages, which I would suspect, and I'm not a sheep person or a goat person, but I suspect that for them to sell these off, if it was for, especially for sheep, I guess you use that for wool, wouldn't you? You probably don't want the speckled, the odd color. You want the pure white wool, don't you, to make fine linens or whatever it might be, the cloth. And so he's going to take those. And he's got a plan. He knows what he's doing, Jacob does. He says, in the future, when you check on the animals you have given me as my wages, you'll see that I have been honest. Because it also gives a sign, doesn't it? If he has a pure white sheep with him, it means he did what? More than likely. He could have stolen it, right? You know, that's how they kind of are separating them out. If you find in my flock any goats without speckles or spots, or any sheep that are not black, you will know that I've stolen them from you. So Laban says, all right, it'll be as you say. But that very day, Laban went out and removed the male goats that were streaked and spotted, and the female goats that were speckled and spotted and had white patches, and all the black sheep. And he placed them in the care of his own sons. He's kind of hiding them, isn't he? So that when Jacob goes out to look for them, is he going to find any? No. Because it looks like Laban's trying to deceive him again, isn't he? To keep him on the farm. And if not to keep him on the farm, to send him away with nothing. Because that's all Jacob has asked for, isn't it? Is the speckled, spotted, or black sheep. Nothing else. So it says, then he placed them in the care of his own sons, who took them a 3 days' journey from where Jacob was. Meanwhile, Jacob stayed and cared for the rest of Laban's flocks. And that's pretty dirty, isn't it? What Laban's doing. He's white streaked branches. They gave birth to young that were streaked, speckled, and spotted. Jacob has found a loophole, has he not? In how he's creating speckled, spotted, and streaked animals. Jacob separated those lambs from Laban's flock, and at mating time he turned the flock to face Laban's animals that were streaked or black. This is how he built his own flock instead of increasing Laban's. Turnaround's fair play, isn't it? So he's found a way to create these other animals, or at least the ones that he can take. Whenever the stronger females were ready to mate, Jacob would place the peeled branches in the watering trough in front of them, and then they would mate in front of these branches. But he didn't do this with the weaker ones, so the weaker lambs belonged to Laban, and the stronger ones belonged to Jacob. As a result, Jacob became very wealthy with large flocks of sheep and goats, female and male servants, and many camels and donkeys. So he began to increase on his own, didn't he? Poor Laban. Well, kind of deserved it, didn't he? Yeah. So he's helped Laban become very wealthy, and now he's helped himself to become very wealthy. And so that way we're going to see this kind of change a little bit. Chapter 31, though, we see that Jacob soon learned that Laban's sons were grumbling about him. Jacob has robbed our father of everything. He has gained all his wealth at our father's expense. And Jacob began to notice a change in Laban's attitude toward him. Laban's becoming upset because he feels that he's been deceived by Jacob, hasn't he? When what Jacob really kind of did was solve what Laban had done, and he just found a way to make stronger animals for himself, didn't he? In the colors that he knew that he had. Because when he talked to Laban, Laban promised him that he could take what? The spotted, streaked, speckled, whatever it was. He really didn't do anything wrong very much, did he? It's just it just happened to be that those animals became those colors, and Laban said, "Those are the ones you can have." Okay. So Laban's getting upset. The sons are upset. So what happens here? The Lord says to Jacob in verse 3 of 31, return to the land of your father and grandfather and your relatives there, and I will be with you. So Jacob called Rachel and Leah out to the field where he was watching his flock. And he said to them, I've noticed that your father's attitude toward me has changed, but the God of my father has been with me. You know how hard I've worked for your father, but he has cheated me, changing my wages 10 times. But God has not allowed him to do me any harm. For he said, the speckled animals will be your wages. The whole flock began to produce speckled young. I can't help it if they started creating speckled young. But that's what he told me I can have. And when he changed his mind and said the striped animals will be your wages, then the whole flock produced what? Striped young. In this way, God has taken your father's animals and given them to me. Hey, he's only doing what Laban says he could have. One time during the mating season, I had a dream and saw the male goats mating with the females were streaked, speckled, and spotted. And then in my dream, the angel of God said to me, Jacob, and I replied, yes, here I am. The angel said, look up and you will see that only the streaked, speckled, and spotted males are mating with the females of your flock. For I have seen how Laban has treated you. I am the God who appeared to you at Bethel, the place where you anointed the pillars of stone and made your vow to me. Now get ready and leave this country and return to the land of your birth. So God has been with Jacob this whole time, and here he is. It's almost that same conversation he's had at one time with Abraham, that he's had with Isaac, that you need to be in your land, and you need to go to your land. And that's what he's doing. Rachel and Leah responded, that's fine with us. We won't inherit any of our father's wealth anyway, because who's going to inherit the wealth? The sons will, won't they? The daughters will not. He has reduced our rights to those of foreign women. Maybe, I wonder if that's sort of their punishment in some way, that Laban has just begun to treat them differently because they have married Jacob, and he's got a sore spot for Jacob right now. But it looks like he's not been treating the daughters very well either. And after he sold us, he wasted the money you paid for us. All the wealth God has given from our father legally belongs to us and our children. So go ahead and do whatever God has told you. He's cheated. Laban has done something wrong to the daughters too, hasn't he? And they're going, you know what? Let's go. Take what you can and let's go. Because what we deserve to have something. And our children deserve to have something. So Jacob put his wives and children on camels, and he drove all the livestock in front of him. He packed all the belongings he had acquired in Padan Aram and set out for the land of Canaan, where his father Isaac lived. At that time they left. Laban was some distance away shearing his sheep. Rachel stole her father's household idols and took them with her. And Jacob outwitted Laban, the Aramean, for they set out secretly and never told Laban they were leaving. So Jacob took all his possessions with him and crossing the Euphrates River, heading for the hill country of Gilead. And so there he goes. Laban doesn't even know he's left. And so he's heading out in this moment. 3 days later, it says, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. 3 days later, that's a pretty good track now that he's already headed out there, isn't he? Do you think he can catch up with him now? You wouldn't think so, would you? It says he caught up with him. He caught up with Jacob, though, because he was in hot pursuit, it says, 7 days later in the hill country of Gilead. But the previous night God had appeared to Laban the Aramean in a dream and told him, I'm warning you, leave Jacob alone. You don't mess with God, do you? When he warns you, what do? You listen, don't you? Laban catches up with Jacob as he was camped in the hill country of Gilead, and he set up his camp not far from Jacob's. What do you mean by deceiving me like this? Laban demanded. How dare you drag my daughters away like prisoners of war? Why did you slip away secretly? Why did you deceive me? Well, he's got a lot of room to talk, does he not? And why didn't you say you wanted to leave? I would have given you a farewell feast with singing and music accompanied by tambourine and harps. Why didn't you let me kiss my daughters and grandchildren and say goodbye? You have acted very foolishly. I could destroy you, but the God of your father appeared to me last night and warned me, leave Jacob alone. I can understand your feeling that you must go, but your intense longing for your father's homes, but why have you stolen my gods? Well, Jacob really didn't, did he? Rachel did. I rushed away because I was afraid, Jacob said. I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. But as for your gods, see if you can find them and let the person who has taken them die. Uh-oh. See, Jacob doesn't know that they've been taken, does he? And remember, it's Rachel that took them. And what is it about Rachel? Rachel's the favorite of Jacob, isn't he? What did he just say? If you find them, that person should die. And if you, it says, find anything else that belongs to you, identify it before all these relatives of ours, and I will give it back. But Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the household idols. Laban went first into Jacob's tent to search there, then into Leah's, and then the tents of the 2 servant wives, but found nothing. Finally, he went to Rachel's tent. But Rachel had taken the household idols and hidden them in her camel saddle, and now she was sitting on them. When Laban had thoroughly searched her tent without finding them, she said to her father, "Please, sir, forgive me if I don't get up for you. I'm having my monthly period." So Laban continued his search, but he could not find the household idols. So she's she's a little deceptive too. She's a lot like her dad, isn't she? Then Jacob became very angry, and he challenged Laban, and he says, "What's my crime? What have I done to make you chase me as though I were a criminal? You have rummaged through everything I own. Now show me what you found that belongs to you. Set it here in front of us before our relatives for all to see, and let them judge between us." And there's a lot of animosity between these two now, isn't it? And it always kind of has been, it seems like. But here, it's just getting to that boiling point in some ways. And so there's this challenge laid out by Jacob after all that's happened. Laban didn't find anything, did he? Because it's hidden. Verse 38 says, "For 20 years I have been with you, caring for your flocks. In that time your sheep and goats never miscarried. In all those years I never used a single ram of yours for food. If any were attacked and killed by wild animals, I never showed you the carcass and asked you to reduce the count of your flock. No, I took the loss myself. You made me pay for every stolen animal, whether it was taken in broad daylight or in the dark of night." Laban was not a very nice man, was he? "I worked for you through the scorching heat of the day and through the cold and sleepless nights. Yet for 20 years I slaved in your house. I worked for 14 years earning your 2 daughters, and then 6 more years for your flock. And you changed my wages 10 times, he says. In fact, if the God of my father had not been on my side, the God of Abraham and the fearsome God of Isaac, you would have sent me away empty-handed. But God has sent your abuse and my hard work. Has seen it. That is why he appeared to you last night and rebuked you." Wow. In a sense, he's saying, God is mad at you for what you've done to me. But look what he's done to him. I mean, he's really been sort of kind of not real nice to Jacob, has he? Tricked him to marry his oldest daughter, let him marry his youngest daughter, worked another 7 years, and looks like he worked another 6 years for the flock. He's changed his wages. Undoubtedly, he's changed them to the wrong. He's tricked him with the flocks, didn't he? And now he has the nerve to come after him. But he says God has seen everything, and that is why God had that dream. God is special, isn't he? I mean, God really has a relationship here with Jacob that is different from it is with anyone else, it seems like. He knows what's going on. He knows what needs to be done. And he is challenging Laban. He is going to his dreams and say, don't you mess with Jacob. Because Jacob has a greater calling, doesn't he? And he is to carry on with Abraham, Isaac, and now Jacob, to carry on this mission that is to be what? to see this people being born, being developed, being created. So in verse 43 it says, "And Laban replied to Jacob, These women are my daughters, these children are my grandchildren, and these flocks are my flocks. In fact, everything you see is mine. But what can I do now about my daughters and their children? So come, let's make a covenant, you and I, and it will be a witness to our commitment." Now, what was a covenant? Do you remember? It's a promise. It's an agreement between two parties, isn't it? So Jacob took a stone and he set it up as a monument. And then he told his family members, "Gather some stones." And so they gathered stones and pulled them in a heap. And then Jacob and Laban sat down by the side of the pile of stones to eat a covenant meal. And to commemorate the event, Laban called the place Jagar Sahaduth, which means witness pile in Aramaic. And Jacob called it Galid, which means witness pile in Hebrew. It's interesting how they use stones for stuff, isn't it? To make altars, to make memorials, and now to make a place that sort of represents the covenant between these two. Then Laban declared, "This pile of stones will stand as a witness to remind us of the covenant we have made today." This explains why it was called Galid, witness pile, but it was also called Mizpah, which means watchtower. For Laban said, "May the Lord keep watch between us to make sure that we keep this covenant when we are out of each other's sight. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you marry other wives, God will see it, even if no one else does, and he will witness to this covenant between us." So part of this covenant is also the treatment he's going to have for his wives, is it not? That there is going to be some sort of relationship that's developed between Laban and Jacob at this point, as a reminder to Jacob that these are Laban's two daughters, his grandchildren, while the covenant is also going to be between Laban, that he's going to leave Jacob alone. So he says again, "See these stones," and he says, "See as a monument between us. They will stand as witnesses of our vows. I will never pass this pile of stones to harm you, and you must never pass these stones or this monument to harm me." Sort of like a border there, isn't it now? "I will call on the God of our ancestors, the God of your grandfather Abraham, and the God of my grandfather Nahor to serve as a judge between us." And so Jacob took an oath before the fearsome God of his father Isaac to respect the boundary line. And then Jacob offered a sacrifice to God there on the mountain and invited everyone to a covenant feast. And they ate. They spent the night on the mountain. Laban got up early in the morning, and he kissed his grandchildren and his daughters, and he blessed them. And then he left, and he returned home. It's an interesting story, isn't it? So what we see now is now we're moving into a new place for Jacob. He's no longer bound, or he's no longer living under the roof of Laban. The daughters are no longer living under the roof of Laban. Jacob is now his own community in a sense, isn't he? He has his wealth that he's accumulated, and he's taking that with him. He's got the daughters, he's got the sons, he's got the servant girls, he's got everybody that belongs to him and to the ladies, and they are now making their way. And Laban has gone back to his. So when we get to verse 32 here, we don't hear about Laban. I don't think we hear about Laban again. We don't need to, do we? He's going his way with his family and doing his thing. Jacob's going to do his thing. So now we're going to focus mostly on Jacob. We're going to focus on the sons. We're going to focus on Joseph here in the next couple weeks or so. So I'm going to stop for tonight. And next week we'll be online again. I'll start at 32, and we're going to see Jacob and Esau meeting together with one another. Remember, that's one of the more... That's a pretty important story, I think, that we see, because when we last saw those two together, it was not a good thing, was it? Because Esau said, as long as his dad was alive, Jacob would. Basically, what he says is Jacob will be alive. But once dad dies, it's no holds barred. And Rebekah told Jacob, that's why Jacob ended up with Laban, is that she said, you need to go. Esau's upset. And remember, Esau's the bigger of the two of you. Esau's the hunter. Esau, in a sense, is the man. He's the tough guy, and you do not want to mess with him. So here we're in in chapter 32. When we look at that next week, we're going to see this meeting. It's going to be a reunion between the two, isn't it? The interesting thing will be, it's not going to end up the way Jacob thinks it will, does it? It's very different. So I want to leave you in suspense. If I know you know the scripture, but I want to leave you in suspense for that. So it was good to have you guys tonight, and for you guys watching, glad y'all could be with us, and blessings to you.